other economic entities, etc., etc. Let's throw a few more things into the stew here before we wrap up economic supranationalist organizations. Because there are those supranationalist organizations on the planet that have a variety of missions and goals, only one of which may be economic. And actually, some of these organizations that are trying to be primarily economic are just failing at it. So I haven't even mentioned them as part of the big players of economic blocks we've now already covered. And I just have a couple here that I'm going to touch upon, and we're going to come back to these in later sections. And they are the AU and the SCO. The AU stands for the African Union, and it used to be called the Organization of African Unity. That's a mouthful. And they changed the name to African Union to try to pick up on the success and piggyback on the whole concept of the European Union, of course, the most popular, biggest trade bloc on planet Earth. Unfortunately for the Africans, it ain't worked. It ain't worked for them. It's been working awesome in Europe where economies are rich and there's lots of trading going on. It hasn't worked in Africa. And this isn't even the first time they've tried it. There's been a slew of acronyms and trade blocs attempted in Africa over the course of the last 50, 60 years. And all of them have fallen flat on their face. And I'm not making fun of my African friends. But why has trade bloc things not worked in Africa? In a word, they're poor, and poor people don't buy shit. So forming a trade bloc, of course, the essence of it is that you lower tariffs and barriers to trade between your member states, and everybody buys more and consumes more. But in Africa, they're not buying or consuming anything anyway. So lowering the tariffs hasn't really helped much. It's not really done anything. Because in Africa, most economies, most African states, actually export most of their goods to countries outside of the region, and they import their goods from countries outside of the region. So most African stuff goes to America and Europe and China and Japan, and that's where they get their finished goods from too. They're not really trading with each other. All the people there are po. They ain't got no money to be buying more goods and services from their fellow neighboring African countries. It just hasn't really worked out. But the AU is doing a couple of other things that I think do have future promise for success, so we're going to come back to them a little bit later. Next, let's go to the SCO, though. This one's one that is economically doing some things right, but it's not their primary mission. The SCO is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Used to be called the Shanghai Six, but now they have 7 or 8 members. Russia and China are the primary members, and Central Asian states kind of form up the sandwich, the Asian sandwich in between. And this is a grouping that I don't really know what their main mission is because I don't think they know what their primary mission is. They're a kind of a new bloc, and so they're still feeling things out. But having said that, economics is certainly a major part of what they're doing, even if it's not the primary thing they're doing. And I'm thinking specifically of they are working together, the member states working together to encourage trade, yes, but of specific commodities. They have been talking about even building infrastructure between the member states to move natural gas and oil. Russia and the Central Asian states have a ton of the stuff. China needs a ton of the stuff. So this is kind of a natural inclination to move towards economic collaboration, particularly with energy resources. But of course, at the same time, they say, well, hey, we're doing this, so we might as well have some free trade stuff we talk about. But again, it's not the only and not the primary thing they do. We're going to come back to the SCO when we get to defensive organizations. So we'll see these two entities again. Just wanted to touch upon, they do either attempt or incorporate some economic elements into the other broader spectrum of things that they're really focusing on. Now, before I get out of this section of international organizations based on economic factors, I would be remiss to not mention at least one more oddball that I know you've all heard of, unless you've been living under a barrel for your whole life. A barrel of oil, that is, because the one I'm talking about is the elusively confusing OPEC. That's right. Now, OPEC is what we refer to as a cartel. And it's a cartel of some significance on the international stage. A cartel is not, repeat, is not the same thing as a trade bloc. Now, OPEC's the one you've heard of, and you know that it's got a bunch of member states. So you might look at that and be like, oh, it's a bunch of member countries and this economic union, so it's a trade bloc. It's not a trade bloc. In fact, cartels have nothing to do with trade at all, per se, except when it comes to one single commodity or resource. And that's the backbone upon which they're all built. So What is a cartel? And specifically, why is OPEC so important? A cartel is a formal, written, legal agreement between a bunch of competing businesses who are going to work together to control the lion's share of a singular resource. Now, there might be 10 companies that deal, say, in copper and who have been competing with each other. If they then form a cartel, they are saying, hey, let's all get together, and us together, us 10 companies, we control like all the world's copper, so we can do a lot of interesting things that make us a lot more money. Okay, like how? How is it that working together businesses can control more? Well, when businesses compete with each other, it actually lowers the price. So in our example, these 10 companies producing copper can undercut each other. One group can say, hey, we're going to sell our copper for $5 a ton. Another's going to say, hey, well, we're going to compete with you. We're going to sell for $4 a ton. And another business might say, hey, we're getting ready to go bankrupt, so we're actually going to sell it for $1 a ton just because we need to dump the stuff. And what this equates to is the price going down for consumers. That's what competition between businesses does, lowers price. A cartel can get together and do the reverse. Once these businesses are all colluding together, they say, here's what we're going to do. Let's all agree on policies. We're the producers and manufacturers that control the lion's share of this stuff in the world. We own it. So let's work together instead of competing. Let's all fix the supply. Let's all decide how much we're going to make every year. And in doing so, we therefore can set the price. We'll set the price collectively and we'll all charge the same thing. We all make more money. Yeah! That is the essence of cartels. Again, they're not about anything else, not about free trade. They're just about dealing with a certain commodity that they control to fix a stable set price for. Okay? Now let's bring it back to OPEC, the most important cartel in the world. OPEC, of course, deals with oil. The name stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Petroleum means oil. Exporting means they make a hell ton of it and then sell it or export it out to the rest of the world. And it's a really confusing one for most Americans, and here's why. Who are the members of OPEC? What businesses are in OPEC? Here are the OPEC members, the dozen countries that are in OPEC right now. It's Algeria, Angola, Ecuador, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Libya, Nigeria, and Venezuela. And I know what you're thinking already. What the hell? You said a cartel was a group of businesses getting together. Those are countries. I already learned that. Yes, here's the deal. With OPEC, these 12 countries nationalize their oil industries. Yeah, you remember that from back in the economics lecture. I know you do. These countries outright own and control the oil industries and everything about the oil in their respective countries. And it's those national businesses from these countries which have gotten together to form the OPEC cartel. Maybe tease it out in your head like this if this helps you remember it a little bit more. It's not that Saudi Arabian government is in OPEC, it's the Saudi Arabian oil business and the Venezuelan oil company and the Iranian oil business. It's those entities, business entities from the state, which have gotten together to collude with each other to set supply and prices for oil. Does that make a little more sense? Having said that, could the United States ever join OPEC? I know most of you are dying laughing already going, oh, hell no. All those OPEC countries hate the U.S. They would never be invited to join OPEC. Oh, hell no. It's got nothing to do with niceties or liking each other because most OPEC countries hate each other. The U.S. could never join OPEC because the U.S. doesn't control its oil industry. The U.S. government does not own and control the oil. It lets Exxon and Shell and BP do all that stuff. And boy, aren't they doing a fabulous job. So the U.S. hasn't nationalized its oil industry. It could never join OPEC. And even if it did, even if the U.S. nationalized all of its oil, it still couldn't join OPEC. Why? Because look at the name again. Organization of Petroleum exporting countries. The U.S. can never export oil. The U.S. is the biggest consumer of oil on planet Earth. The U.S. actually produces a hell ton of oil, but we slurp all that up, and then we have to import tons more to satisfy our huge demand. So the U.S. doesn't export nothing. They would never be able to join OPEC for two very good reasons. All right, but let's get back to the mechanics of OPEC. How is it actually works on the ground? OPEC gets together several times a year. And in these meetings, sitting around a table, these 12 happy countries say, okay, we're going to project how much demand we think the world's going to have for oil next year. How much is the world going to use next year? We're predicting. And then once we have that number, we're going to divvy that up for production for each member state. So once we think we know how much the world's going to use next year, then Saudi Arabia, you produce 50 billion barrels. Iran, you do 35 billion barrels. Venezuela, you do 10 billion barrels. And this is based on how much resource each of the countries has, but also their capacity. How much oil can they actually make in a year? So it's not that it's all just split up evenly. And therefore, they can all work together and they sell all their oil and they set the price. So they say, okay, and here's how much we're each going to produce. And let's go ahead and set the price at, say, $92 a barrel. Now, I know you stock traders out there say, oh, the price of oil changes every day. Yes, but OPEC really does set it. It sets the standard of roughly where it's going to be for the next 6 months to a year. And other countries do make oil and sell oil, so the price fluctuates on the open market every day. But OPEC says, here's how much we're charging. We control, us OPEC countries control 60% of the world's oil, and we are collectively all going to charge $90 a barrel, and that's the way it is. Done, okay? Does that help? Does that make more sense? Consider these just for oil now, just for oil. These countries don't get together on anything else. They don't agree on anything politically, not anything socially. They don't agree on squat hardly nothing on planet Earth. And that's not even a free trade bloc. They only deal with oil. They don't care about anything else between the member states. It just confusing because the member states in this circumstance are member business states, okay? Now, is this story now all complete? The OPEC countries all have a great time getting together and setting the price, and they all sit around the table singing Kumbaya and handshaking each other and counting their billions of dollars they've made off of oil. Not really. As I've already referenced, a lot of these countries really don't like each other that much, and they fight quite a bit amongst themselves on how much oil to make and the price to set. Infighting is common. There are countries that have bailed the hell out of OPEC altogether. Indonesia used to be a member, and they're just like, the hell with this. We're out. We're going to sell oil at the price we want. We don't want to have to get together with these 12 other countries to figure it out. On top of that, the infighting is between the major players of OPEC, and the Saudi Arabians are the main one. They have the biggest oil reserves, and they produce the most oil every year and export the most oil every year. And, of course, they're ally of the United States and of European countries. So the Saudis generally come to the table and say, hey, we want to produce just enough oil so that we all make a good amount of profit, but at a low price, and we want a very stable supply. On the other side of the table are usually the Iranians and the Venezuelans who are like, we hate the United States. We don't care about the West. And we should gouge the shit out of these guys. Because guess what? They're a bunch of crackheads. They are addicted to oil just like a crackhead's addicted to crack. They're going to have to pay whatever price we tell them. Why should we charge just $90? We should charge $200 a barrel. We should just charge $200 a barrel. We own the majority of it. They'll have to pay it. And that's an interesting point that I wanted to elaborate on a little bit more. A lot of folks in the United States and the U.S. government and free market capitalists around the world really hate OPEC. Some people think they're outright evil. And they hate them because cartels really fly in the face of free market capitalism, right? That's not free trade when you're having companies work together, colluding to artificially inflate a price and control supply. But the Saudis and others would argue, you know what, OPEC's not really that bad of a thing. Yes, they get to set the price, and yes, maybe they set it too high sometimes if you get the Iranians with too much influence who want to jack the price way up. But the Saudi Arabians and others say, hey, no, we want a lower, stable price. We're all about stability. Why? Well, just like your example with crack. You don't want your crack to be at too high a price. Because if you jack the rates of crack up way too high, several things are likely to happen. The crackheads will run out of money and they can't buy any more of your product, which you're not going to be happy about that. Or two, the crackheads will find an alternative high. And while this may seem comical that I'm talking about crack, it's actually applicable to oil in a very big way because, yes, the world is addicted to oil. And yes, it cannot easily go to something else. But if the price were to go high enough, they would. And specifically what I'm talking about here is if the price of oil were to go to $200, $300, $500 a barrel, which the Saudis do not want, other countries around the world, poor countries would just say, well, we're done. We don't got any more money, so we can't buy your product. But other countries would say, we're going to look at alternatives. We will find the oil somewhere else for a cheaper price. We'll go to countries not in OPEC who don't have a fixed price. Or we'll get alternative sources of energy. And that's Saudi Arabia and OPEC's hugest fear on the planet. Holy crap, they actually don't want the price of oil to be too high. Think about it from their perspective. Oil is all they got. It's their moneymaker. And so could they charge $1,000 a barrel for it right now and make a bunch of money? Yeah, they could. They're a cartel. They control the lion's share. They tomorrow could say we're charging $1,000 a barrel. But what will happen in the next year? I mean, oh my God. Oil use would just dump because even people in the United States would say, holy shit, now it costs way too much money to run my Hummer. I mean, oil's been cheap as hell forever. And the Saudis want to keep it that way because you don't want to, rock the boat too much and get people all agitated and make them pay too much at the pump and make their lives really expensive because then the Americans in particular will say, the hell with this then. We are going to go find oil somewhere else. And just as a little side note here, other major oil producers include Russia, Norway, and Mexico. All three of these countries are not in OPEC, so they are not confined by a set price. So when the price gets too high, these three countries will start producing way more oil and selling it cheaper. And that, of course, scares the OPEC countries. Like, crap, we're getting undercut. But the much, much, much bigger fear is if you make oil $1,000 a barrel OPEC, folks in the U.S. and Europe and other places will say, like, holy crap, we're not using that shit no more. Let's now invest heavily in alternative energies. Let's look at wind and solar in a very real way because, quite frankly, we haven't even done it seriously at all yet. We're just piddling around with it because the price of oil is cheap. Dudes, mark my words. The only way you're going to get to alternative energies is for the price of oil to go through the roof and force people to go to a different thing, to a different source, just like crackheads would do. Yes, they're addicted to crack. But if the price of crack goes to $1,000 an ounce, they will start huffing antifreeze or smoking ganja or doing any number of other alternatives. Same thing applies with OPEC and oil and the world. That's why it's so significant, so important, because these guys set the price, which ripple effects out and affects not just economies, but politics and technology. Think about that. OPEC plays a very, very big role in the world as the world's biggest and most important cartel. Now, there's another cartel I bet you've heard about as well, at least in passing, and that would be De Beers. You ever heard of De Beers? De Beers, the diamond people. Yes, the De Beers cartel, it's a group of businesses under the single De Beers umbrella. And they do control something like 80 to 90% of the world's diamonds. And I'm not just talking diamond supply. They control 80 to 90% of the diamond mines, the diamond production, diamond drill device, diamond technology, finished diamonds. They control really all of it. And they have in the past been labeled as a monopoly. And I brought them up particularly so I can tease out these two terms. You now want to know what cartel is. What's a monopoly? It's kind of close. A monopoly, however, exist when a single individual or a single business or company controls virtually all the cards. They control almost everything. And they have sufficient control over a particular resource or product or service to determine significantly the terms at which everybody else in the world can get it. So it's a single entity that's like, I've got most of it, if not all of it, and you will pay my price. I hold all the cards. I decide the supply, the price, everything else that goes along with this single commodity. Now, De Beers used to be labeled as a monopoly 100 years ago. It was a single company that just controlled 90% of everything. But they have since diversified their shit, diversified up their company, and they bought other companies, and they have other companies that work together with them in the cartel. So again, they can collectively set the price, control the production, and therefore the price of diamonds worldwide. And they do it really, really well. I know you've heard of them with conflict diamonds and all this other stuff. They're under scrutiny because they do control that singular commodity in virtually all respects. Having said that, maybe now you understand why OPEC could never be labeled as a monopoly. It's a dozen different countries with a dozen different agendas. It's not a singular entity. Yes, OPEC is a singular entity that does control the price of oil, but it's not a monopoly. There's too many players involved, right? And again, De Beers used to be a monopoly, but it's diversified, so there's more players involved in too. Both of these are cartels. The only monopoly that I can think of, and I did want to bring this up to kind of get you thinking, debating amongst yourselves. We could debate about it in class too. Can you think of any companies that may soon be monopoly status, or perhaps they're monopolies already? One that a lot of folks are talking about is Google. Yeah, that's right. Google, the all-powerful Google, which really controls the lion's share, if not like all, of internet trafficking and internet information and search engines and all this other stuff. But maybe you know they're also scanning in every book ever written in mankind's history, and they're scanning in the entire planet. Every micrometer is going to be mapped by Google and Google Maps, and you'll be able to find a certain rock in the middle of Afghanistan if you want to go look for it, and they're warehousing all this information. Google is very unique in that they're becoming, it appears, the first monopoly on digital information. It's the sign of our times and technology. And it's very fascinating stuff. Now, I actually like Google. I'm not making fun of Google. I just want you to think about this. What does that mean when a singular company controls everything? They can then dictate the terms at which you can get it. And when you start talking about who controls the information, that's starting to sound a little scary. And that's why most capitalist economies like the United States are very anti-monopoly. And kind of following along with that, usually anti-cartel too. But the United States in particular, and the Europeans and others, have anti-monopoly laws. They say, no, you cannot have that here. Remember when Microsoft got taken out and sued for being a monopoly? Because they had too much power, too much influence to dictate the terms in which people could do things. So capitalist countries, usually anti-monopoly, and following along that line, usually anti-cartel as well. And OPEC and De Beers are your best examples of cartels. Google, perhaps the best example of a future monopoly. But let's get out of here now. So those are the alternative international organizations based on economic activity. Although none of them is exactly a trade bloc in terms of the ones that we've talked about, like NAFTA, ASEAN, EU. They're all kind of a little unique and different. But enough of the economics. I can't do no more. Let's now turn to some other supranationalist organizations that form up for different reasons altogether, namely the whole peace, security, and defensive ones. Let's do that next.